Henry David Thoreau's 2-year sojourn at Walden Pond, beginning in the summer of 1845, was not merely a retreat from society but a meticulously designed experiment in living. Driven by a profound dissatisfaction with the prevailing materialistic currents of mid-19th century America, Thoreau sought a path towards what he termed a deliberate life. This aspiration stemmed from a deep-seated belief, shared with his intellectual circle, that societal progress, particularly the burgeoning Industrial Revolution, was leading humanity away from essential truths and spiritual fulfillment. The constant pursuit of wealth, the entanglements of social obligations, and the relentless pace of conventional existence, Thoreau observed, served to numb individuals to the fundamental realities of life and their own inner potential. He yearned to strip away these layers of artifice and distraction, to confront life in its most elemental form, and to understand what it truly meant to live. This desire for unadulterated experience and intentional existence formed the primary cause for his move to the secluded woods surrounding Walden Pond. A decision that would ultimately yield one of the most influential works of American literature and philosophy. The intellectual and cultural landscape of Thoreau's time was dominated by the burgeoning force of American Transcendentalism, a philosophical movement that profoundly shaped his worldview. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a central figure of this movement and a close friend and mentor to Thoreau, provided a crucial philosophical bedrock for Thoreau's project. Emerson's writings, particularly Nature and Self-Reliance, championed the innate goodness of humanity and nature, the power of intuition over empirical reason, and the vital importance of individual spiritual insight. Transcendentalists believed that a divine spark resided within each person and in the natural world, and that by cultivating inner wisdom and intuition, individuals could achieve a higher state of consciousness and moral understanding. This era also witnessed rapid industrialization, urbanization, and the expansion of the market economy, leading to widespread societal shifts. While many embraced these changes as markers of progress, Thoreau and his fellow transcendentalists viewed them with growing apprehension, seeing in them a dangerous drift towards conformity, materialism, and a loss of individual spiritual sovereignty. The philosophical underpinnings of Thoreau's Walden experiment are deeply rooted in American Transcendentalism, a movement that championed intuition, individualism, and the inherent divinity within each person and the natural world. Emerson's emphasis on intuition, the divine spark within each individual, and the spiritual significance of nature provided Thoreau with a framework for his own observations and experiences at Walden Pond. Essays like Nature and Self-Reliance articulated core transcendentalist tenets: the inherent goodness of humanity, the importance of individual conscience, and the idea that true knowledge comes from within and from direct experience of the divine in nature. Thoreau internalized these concepts, translating them into the practical, lived reality of his experiment, thereby solidifying Walden as a quintessential expression of the Transcendentalist movement and its enduring impact on American thought. Thoreau's narrative development in Walden is meticulously structured around his experience of living in a cabin he built himself near the pond. His intention was not to isolate himself entirely, but to engage with the world from a position of profound intentionality and minimal material encumbrance. He meticulously documented his days, his observations of nature, his economic practices, and his philosophical reflections. The first part of the book, Economy, serves as a foundational argument for his thesis, dissecting the societal obsession with labor and possessions, and demonstrating how one could live a fulfilling life with far less than was conventionally believed necessary. He famously calculated the meager costs of his subsistence, proving that the necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing, and fuel, could be obtained with a fraction of the labor demanded by society. This pragmatic approach was not about asceticism for its own sake, but about liberation. By reducing his material needs, he freed himself from the drudgery of excessive work, thereby gaining invaluable time and mental space for contemplation, observation, and genuine engagement with the world around him. His experiment was a continuous process of testing and refining his principles, a practical application of transcendentalist ideals in the face of everyday realities. The act of building his own cabin on the shores of Walden Pond was a tangible manifestation of Thoreau's commitment to self-reliance and his critique of dependency on societal structures. He details the process of constructing his modest dwelling, emphasizing the minimal cost and the direct labor involved. This was not an act of whimsical construction, it was a deliberate assertion of his ability to provide for himself. To create his own shelter and environment free from the obligations and compromises often associated with renting or purchasing property within the established social order. The cabin became a symbol of his freedom, a physical space where he could enact his philosophical principles. It represented a conscious choice to simplify his material existence, reducing his needs to the bare essentials and thereby liberating himself from the economic pressures that compelled most men into a life of arduous labor for the sake of possessions. The act of building was, therefore, an act of philosophical declaration, an embodiment of his belief in the power of individual agency. Thoreau's meticulous engagement with his economic reality at Walden Pond served as a stark contrast to the prevailing societal obsession with accumulating wealth. He approached his finances with an almost scientific rigor, meticulously accounting for every penny spent and earned. This was not a pursuit of poverty, but a demonstration of how little was truly necessary to sustain a life of meaning and substance. He famously outlined the costs associated with his cabin and his basic subsistence, illustrating that with intentionality and a focus on essentials, one could dramatically reduce one's economic obligations. This radical economic perspective was a direct challenge to the burgeoning industrial capitalism of his era, which promoted the idea that continuous economic growth and the acquisition of material goods were the primary markers of success and happiness. Thoreau argued, conversely, that this relentless pursuit often led to a spiritual impoverishment, trapping individuals in a cycle of labor and consumption that prevented them from experiencing the richer dimensions of life. Central to Thoreau's vision of deliberate living was his profound conception of work, which he viewed not merely as a means to economic survival but as a fundamental avenue for spiritual growth and self-realization. In the chapter, Economy, he meticulously deconstructs the societal imperative to work excessively, arguing that much of what people labor for is in fact superfluous, serving only to maintain a level of comfort that paradoxically binds them more tightly to their toil. He famously estimated that if a man could fulfill his basic needs, housing, food, clothing, and fuel with a mere 66 days of labor per year, the remaining time would be his own, free for intellectual pursuits, contemplation, and the cultivation of his inner life. This radical redefinition of labor aimed to disentangle economic activity from the pursuit of wealth for its own sake, positing instead that work should be a source of dignity, moral development, and a means to understand oneself and one's place in the natural order. Thoreau believed that by simplifying needs, one could dramatically reduce the amount of necessary labor, thereby liberating oneself from the shackles of materialistic ambition and allowing for a life rich in experience rather than possessions. Thoreau's philosophy at Walden embraced a nuanced view of work and its role in human fulfillment, challenging the prevailing notion of labor as merely a means of subsistence. He posited that engaging in purposeful and self-directed work was not only a pathway to self-reliance but also a source of spiritual growth and a foundation for a morally sound life. For Thoreau, the alienated labor that characterized much of industrial society was antithetical to genuine human development. He sought work that was intrinsically rewarding, that fostered a connection to the earth and to one's own capabilities. His own endeavors at Walden, from building his cabin to cultivating his beans, were undertaken with a deliberate mindfulness, transforming them from chores into acts of conscious living. The concept of essential facts of life, as articulated by Thoreau in the opening of Walden, formed the philosophical bedrock of his entire experiment. He lamented that most individuals, caught in the routines and distractions of societal life, lived lives that were far from essential, bogged down by superfluities and superficial concerns. His move to Walden Pond was driven by a profound desire to confront these essential truths directly, to strip away the artificial layers of convention and comfort, and to experience existence in its rawest, most fundamental form. This meant understanding the fundamental necessities of survival, the rhythms of the natural world, and the deep currents of one's own inner consciousness. By fronting these essential facts, Thoreau sought a form of spiritual and intellectual clarity, believing that a life lived in accordance with these fundamental realities was the only path to true fulfillment and wisdom. This philosophical objective was not about romanticizing hardship, but about recognizing that facing life's fundamental challenges with awareness and intention was the key to unlocking its deepest meanings. The doctrine of self-reliance, a cornerstone of Transcendentalism and a guiding principle for Thoreau, was not a call for isolation but for profound inner independence. Influenced heavily by Emerson's essay of the same name, Thoreau advocated for individuals to trust their own intuition and judgment above societal conventions or the opinions of others. This involved a conscious effort to resist conformity and to cultivate a strong inner moral compass. Guided by the inherent truths discovered through introspection and communion with nature. Thoreau saw the pervasive tendency to mimic the lives and thoughts of others as a form of spiritual stagnation. He argued that true progress, both individual and societal, could only emerge from individuals who dared to think for themselves. To live according to their own principles, and to embrace their unique potentials. This commitment to self-reliance was intrinsically linked to his critique of the superficiality of social institutions and popular opinion, which he believed often obscured genuine wisdom and hindered personal growth. For Thoreau, to be self-reliant was to be truly free, capable of discerning and acting upon the essential truths of existence. Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond was a profound testament to the principles of self-reliance, extending beyond mere physical independence to encompass intellectual and spiritual autonomy. He advocated for individuals to trust their inner voice, to question societal norms, and to forge their own paths, rather than conforming to the expectations of others. This commitment to self-reliance was not a rejection of society in its entirety, but a call for individuals to engage with it from a position of inner strength and integrity. Thoreau believed that true fulfillment could only be achieved by understanding and acting upon one's own convictions, free from the pressures of external validation or societal consensus. His writings in Walden encourage readers to cultivate this inner resilience, to become the ultimate arbiters of their own lives, and to draw strength and wisdom from their own experiences and intuitions, thereby fostering a more authentic and empowered existence. Thoreau's ardent advocacy for simplicity in Walden extended far beyond mere material austerity. It represented a deeply philosophical and spiritual imperative. He contended that the relentless pursuit of possessions and the accumulation of wealth served not to enrich human life but to impoverish it, burdening individuals with anxieties and distractions that severed them from genuine experiences and inner peace. His own minimalist lifestyle at Walden Pond, where he carefully curated his possessions and lived in a small, Spartan cabin, was a deliberate demonstration of how essential needs could be met with minimal resources. He argued that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, trapped by the very comforts and conveniences they pursued. Simplicity, for Thoreau, was not about deprivation but about liberation, a shedding of the unnecessary to make room for the essential. It was about recognizing that true wealth resided not in what one owned but in the quality of one's thoughts, relationships, and direct experiences of life and nature. This pursuit of simplicity was a conscious rejection of the prevailing societal narrative that equated success with material accumulation. The simple living movement owes a significant debt to Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond. His detailed accounts of reducing material possessions, minimizing economic entanglements, and focusing on essential needs provided a practical blueprint for individuals seeking to escape the pressures of consumer culture. The movement draws upon Thoreau's core arguments that true happiness and fulfillment are not found in the accumulation of wealth or possessions, but in the quality of one's experiences, relationships, and inner life. By demonstrating that a life of profound satisfaction could be achieved with far fewer material resources, Thoreau offered a compelling alternative to the dominant societal narrative of perpetual economic growth and consumption. His philosophy encourages a conscious re-evaluation of personal values, prompting individuals to question their own needs and desires, and to seek a life that is rich in meaning rather than material wealth, thereby fostering a more sustainable and inwardly focused way of living. Walden serves as a powerful manual for simple living, offering practical insights and philosophical justifications for a life less encumbered by material possessions and societal demands. Thoreau meticulously detailed how he managed his daily life, from building his shelter to procuring food, demonstrating that a life of substance and satisfaction could be achieved with minimal economic outlay. His accounts are not merely descriptive, they are prescriptive, encouraging readers to examine their own needs and desires, and to question the relentless pursuit of more. The book's enduring appeal lies in its ability to demystify the idea of simple living, presenting it not as a form of deprivation, but as a liberation, a shedding of the unnecessary to make room for what is truly essential. Thoreau's work provides a compelling argument for intentionality in daily choices, advocating for a focus on experiences, relationships, and personal growth over the accumulation of material wealth, thereby offering a blueprint for a more grounded and fulfilling existence. Nature, for Henry David Thoreau, was not merely a backdrop for his experiment at Walden Pond, it was an active participant. A profound teacher, and a sanctuary for the soul. His detailed observations of the pond, its surrounding woods, and its inhabitants from the seasonal cycles of the trees to the behavior of animals revealed an intricate, ordered, and fundamentally benevolent universe. He saw in nature a reflection of spiritual truths, a source of wisdom that surpassed the often flawed constructs of human society. The stillness of the woods offered a space for contemplation, the rhythms of the seasons provided lessons in patience and renewal. And the inherent beauty of the natural world inspired awe and a deeper understanding of one's place within the grand cosmic order. Thoreau's connection with nature was deeply personal and philosophical. He sought to immerse himself in its embrace to awaken his own dormant spiritual faculties and to discover the universal laws that govern both the external world and the inner landscape of the human spirit. This profound communion with nature was a central tenet of his transcendentalist beliefs and a vital component of his deliberate life. Thoreau's philosophical engagement with nature at Walden Pond was not a passive appreciation but an active, profound quest for spiritual insight and ethical understanding. He believed that nature served as a divinely ordained text, a repository of truth and wisdom that could guide humanity towards a more authentic and meaningful existence. He felt that modern society, with its artificial constructs and distractions, had severed humanity's innate connection to this primal source of knowledge, leading to a spiritual and moral disorientation. His retreat to the woods was a deliberate attempt to re-establish this connection. To listen to the whispers of the wind, and read the language of the leaves. Believing that in nature's unadulterated form lay the most profound lessons about life, existence, and the human condition. Thoreau's narrative development in Walden is replete with detailed observations of the natural world, each infused with philosophical weight. He doesn't just describe the pond, the woods, or the wildlife, he meticulously records their behaviors, their cycles, and their interactions, drawing parallels to human experience and universal principles. For instance, his observations of the changing seasons mirrored the human journey of life, death, and rebirth, offering a cyclical perspective on existence that transcended the linear, often fearful, perception of time in human affairs. He saw the resilience of nature, its ability to overcome adversity and regenerate, as a powerful ethical lesson. Nature, for Thoreau, was not merely a subject of study but a partner in his philosophical quest, a mirror reflecting the deepest truths of existence. The ultimate result of Thoreau's immersion in nature was the solidification of his belief in its profound philosophical and spiritual significance. He concluded that nature offered an accessible path to self-discovery and a deeper understanding of the universe. By shedding the artificialities of civilization and attuning himself to the rhythms of the natural world, Thoreau found a sense of liberation, clarity, and a profound connection to something larger than himself. Nature became his sanctuary, his classroom, and his church. He derived ethical principles from observing nature's inherent order and balance, advocating for a life lived in harmony with these principles. His philosophical use of nature in Walden transformed the book from a simple memoir into a foundational text for environmental ethics, demonstrating that a deep and respectful relationship with the natural world is essential for both individual fulfillment and the health of the human spirit. Thoreau's profound engagement with the natural world at Walden Pond embodies the spirit of romantic naturalism, a philosophical and artistic perspective that emerged in the 19th century. This approach, while sharing with Transcendentalism a reverence for nature, also emphasized detailed observation, aesthetic appreciation, and a deep emotional connection to the environment. Thoreau's prose vividly captures the sensory details of his surroundings, the changing light on the water, the sounds of the forest, the unfolding of the seasons, infusing his philosophical musings with a palpable sense of place. He saw nature not only as a mirror of spiritual truths but as a dynamic entity with its own inherent beauty and order, deserving of close study and profound respect. This romantic sensibility, combined with his analytical mind, allowed him to draw profound lessons about life, death, and the universe from the smallest natural phenomena, underscoring nature's role as both a source of wisdom and a profoundly moving aesthetic experience. The critique of materialism and consumerism embedded within Walden was exceptionally sharp and prescient for its time. Thoreau observed with dismay how the rapid industrialization and economic expansion of 19th-century America were fostering a society obsessed with acquiring more goods and services, often at the expense of genuine human connection and spiritual well-being. He lamented how individuals became tools of their tools, enslaved by the very possessions and industries they created in their pursuit of progress and comfort. His vivid descriptions of the relentless work required to maintain a life of conventional material comfort exposed the often hidden costs of consumerism, revealing it as a form of self-imposed bondage. Thoreau argued that this ceaseless pursuit of material wealth led to a spiritual and emotional emptiness, distracting people from the more profound and lasting satisfactions that could be found in simple living, meaningful relationships, and a deep connection with the natural world. His work stands as a powerful early indictment of a culture increasingly driven by the acquisition of things, urging a fundamental re-evaluation of what constitutes a truly rich and fulfilling life. Thoreau's critique of materialism and the emerging capitalist economic systems, laid out vividly in the Economy chapter of Walden, stemmed from his deep-seated belief that these systems fundamentally corrupted human values and enslaved individuals. He observed a society where the primary measure of success and happiness was material accumulation, a pursuit that, in his view, led individuals away from their true selves and their inherent spiritual potential. The cause of this critique was his perception of a pervasive cultural delusion, that more possessions equate to a better life. He saw how people were driven by societal expectations and the relentless pursuit of wealth, often at the expense of their own well-being, their relationships, and their connection to the natural world. This relentless focus on economic gain, he argued, transformed human beings into mere laborers, their lives dictated by the need to earn money to purchase goods that ultimately offered little genuine satisfaction. The narrative development of Thoreau's economic critique unfolds as a series of sharp observations and logical deconstructions of societal norms. He dissects the concept of need versus want, arguing that society invents artificial needs that enslave individuals. His famous declaration, "The price of anything is the life you exchange for it," powerfully encapsulates this argument, highlighting the true cost of material possessions not in dollars and cents, but in the time, energy, and life force that must be expended to acquire them. He contrasts the labor required for basic necessities, which he found manageable and even fulfilling when done intentionally, with the arduous and often meaningless labor undertaken solely to support a lifestyle of excessive consumption. Thoreau meticulously analyzes the economics of his own life at Walden Pond, demonstrating how minimal expenditure on basic necessities allowed him to dedicate the majority of his time to intellectual pursuits, self-reflection, and communion with nature. He contrasts this with the vast amounts of time and effort that others dedicated to earning money to pay for rent, clothing, and food, a cycle he deemed fundamentally unsustainable and spiritually impoverishing. He challenged the very notion of wealth, suggesting that true riches were found in intangible qualities like time, health, freedom, and intellectual and spiritual depth, rather than in monetary assets or material possessions. The result of Thoreau's economic critique is a radical re-evaluation of wealth and a powerful argument for prioritizing spiritual and experiential wealth over material accumulation. He posits that by consciously reducing one's material dependencies, individuals can liberate themselves from the demands of a consumerist economy. This liberation allows for a life of greater autonomy, where one's time and energy are directed towards self-discovery, creative expression, and a deeper engagement with the world. Thoreau's vision suggests that a society that values inner richness over outward display would be more fulfilling and equitable. His work serves as a timeless challenge to the relentless pursuit of economic growth at the expense of human well-being and environmental health, advocating for a more sustainable and ethically grounded approach to economic activity. Thoreau's relentless critique of materialism in Walden was a direct confrontation with the prevailing values of his time and continues to hold immense relevance in contemporary society. He observed how the pursuit of material wealth and possessions had become an end in itself for many, overshadowing more significant aspects of human existence such as spiritual growth, intellectual development, and meaningful connection. His writings expose the hollowness of a life defined by the acquisition of goods, arguing that such a focus leads to a loss of self, an enslavement to the external, and a profound disconnect from nature and one's own inner being. Thoreau posited that true wealth lay not in what one owned, but in the richness of one's experiences and the depth of one's understanding. His critique serves as a timeless admonition against the dangers of consumer culture and the superficiality it breeds, urging individuals to re-examine their priorities and to seek fulfillment in sources that are enduring and intrinsically valuable, rather than fleeting material gains. At the heart of Henry David Thoreau's philosophical undertaking at Walden Pond lay a deep and abiding critique of materialism. He observed, with considerable unease, how the burgeoning industrial and consumer culture of mid-19th century America was leading individuals into a state of spiritual stagnation, where the acquisition of goods had become an overriding objective. Thoreau contended that this relentless pursuit of material wealth not only distracted individuals from more profound aspects of life, such as intellectual and spiritual development, but also served to enslave them to their possessions and the labor required to maintain them. He argued that true richness was not to be found in the accumulation of things, but in the depth and quality of one's lived experiences, their connection to nature, and the cultivation of their inner life. Walden stands as a powerful early indictment of a society increasingly defined by its consumerist tendencies, urging a fundamental re-evaluation of values and a redirection of focus towards intrinsically valuable pursuits. The result of Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond was not merely survival in the wilderness, but a profound redefinition of what constitutes a rich and meaningful life. He demonstrated that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in the depth of one's experiences, the clarity of one's thoughts, and the strength of one's connection to the natural world. Simplicity, for Thoreau, was not deprivation but liberation. It freed the mind from the anxieties of acquisition and the burden of maintenance, allowing for greater focus on introspection, observation, and spiritual contemplation. Deliberate living meant actively choosing one's path, understanding the true cost of every action and possession, and living in accordance with one's deepest values. His time at Walden Pond became a living testament to the idea that by reducing external demands, one could profoundly amplify internal fulfillment, proving that a life lived intentionally, in close proximity to nature and with minimal material encumbrance, could indeed be the most abundant. The result of Thoreau's experiment was not merely survival in the wilderness, but a profound redefinition of what constitutes a rich and meaningful life. He demonstrated that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in the depth of one's experiences, the clarity of one's thoughts, and the strength of one's connection to the natural world. Simplicity, for Thoreau, was not deprivation but liberation. It freed the mind from the anxieties of acquisition and the burden of maintenance, allowing for greater focus on introspection, observation, and spiritual contemplation. Deliberate living meant actively choosing one's path, understanding the true cost of every action and possession, and living in accordance with one's deepest values. His time at Walden Pond became a living testament to the idea that by reducing external demands, one could profoundly amplify internal fulfillment, proving that a life lived intentionally, in close proximity to nature and with minimal material encumbrance, could indeed be the most abundant. The concept of higher laws, as explored in Walden, signifies Thoreau's belief in a moral and spiritual order that transcends human legislation and societal conventions. While he famously advocated for civil disobedience against unjust laws, his adherence to higher laws points to a deeper, more fundamental ethical framework derived from nature and innate conscience. He suggests that true justice and morality are not imposed by external authorities but are discovered through introspection and an understanding of the natural world, which he viewed as embodying a perfect, divinely ordained order. This perspective aligns with Transcendentalist ideals, which emphasize the existence of an intuitive moral sense and the inherent divinity within each individual. Thoreau's engagement with higher laws meant living in accordance with these universal principles, even when they conflicted with the dictates of society. It represented a call to a higher form of existence, one guided by inner truth and a profound respect for the inherent order of the cosmos, as revealed through nature and the individual conscience. Thoreau's enduring philosophy has profoundly influenced the environmental movement, offering a foundational text for those who advocate for a deeper connection with and respect for the natural world. His keen observations of Walden Pond and its surroundings, detailed with scientific precision and lyrical prose, highlighted the intrinsic value of nature, independent of its utility to humans. He championed a worldview where nature was not merely a resource to be exploited but a complex, interconnected system deserving of reverence and protection. This perspective laid the groundwork for ecological thought, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all living things and the importance of maintaining ecological balance. Thoreau's writings encouraged a shift in perception, urging individuals to see themselves as part of nature, rather than separate from it, and to recognize that human well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the environment. His legacy continues to inspire environmental ethics, conservation efforts, and a broader appreciation for the wild. The principle of civil disobedience, eloquently championed by Thoreau in his essay of the same name, which draws inspiration from his experiences and reflections during his time at Walden, remains a powerful tool for social activism. Thoreau argued that individuals have a moral obligation to resist unjust laws and governmental policies that violate their conscience. He contended that blind obedience to the state, even in the face of its wrongdoings, was a form of complicity. His refusal to pay a poll tax in protest against slavery and the Mexican-American War exemplified this principle. This philosophical stance posits that individual conscience, guided by a higher moral law, must take precedence over the dictates of the state when there is a conflict. Thoreau's ideas have inspired generations of activists, including Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who employed nonviolent resistance as a means to challenge oppressive regimes and bring about significant social and political change, demonstrating the enduring power of principled nonconformity. The concept of deliberate life, as envisioned by Thoreau, is a call to intentionality and conscious engagement with existence. It is a philosophy that rejects passive drifting through life and instead advocates for a life lived with purpose, awareness, and a clear understanding of one's values. Thoreau's own sojourn at Walden Pond was a radical embodiment of this principle. A conscious effort to strip away the inessential and to confront the fundamental realities of existence. A deliberate life, in his view, involves making conscious choices about how one spends their time, energy, and resources, prioritizing activities that contribute to personal growth, spiritual understanding, and a deep connection with the world. It is a practice of mindful living, where each action is undertaken with intention, and where the focus is on the quality of experience rather than the quantity of possessions or achievements. This philosophy encourages individuals to be active architects of their own lives, rather than passive recipients of circumstance, leading to a more authentic and meaningful existence. The impact of Henry David Thoreau's Walden has proven to be remarkably enduring and far-reaching. It transcends its initial context as a chronicle of a personal experiment, becoming a foundational text for numerous intellectual and social movements. Environmentalists have long drawn inspiration from Thoreau's deep reverence for nature, his keen observations of the natural world, and his implicit call for its preservation. His philosophy of simple living, advocating for reduced consumption and a focus on essential needs, has become a cornerstone of contemporary sustainable living and minimalist movements. Moreover, Walden's powerful indictment of societal pressures and its championing of individual conscience continue to resonate with activists and thinkers who advocate for social change and personal authenticity. Thoreau's insistence on living deliberately and questioning conventional wisdom encourages readers to examine their own lives, to identify what is truly essential, and to pursue a path that aligns with their deepest values. The book's enduring significance lies in its timeless relevance, continuing to challenge and inspire individuals to seek a more authentic, purposeful, and spiritually rich existence in a world that still grapples with the siren call of materialism and distraction. The reverberations of Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond and his subsequent literary testament have extended far beyond the confines of 19th century Concord, shaping and inspiring a multitude of contemporary movements dedicated to environmental stewardship, mindful living, and social justice. His profound advocacy for the preservation of wild spaces and his lyrical, yet empirically grounded, observations of nature laid crucial groundwork for the modern environmental movement. Furthermore, his essay, Civil Disobedience, a powerful testament to the moral obligation to resist unjust laws, provided a foundational text for movements championing nonviolent resistance. On a more personal level, Thoreau's insistent call to simplify, and his demonstration of a life lived deliberately have become cornerstones for the burgeoning movements of minimalism and voluntary simplicity. The minimalist lifestyle, with its emphasis on reducing material possessions and focusing on experiences, directly echoes Thoreau's radical divestment from societal expectations and his embrace of essential living. Even the countercultural movements of the latter half of the 20th century, with their rejection of mainstream norms and their search for alternative modes of existence, found resonance in Thoreau's iconoclastic spirit and his pursuit of a life less ordinary. His work continues to resonate, challenging us to question our own priorities, To reconsider our relationship with both the natural world and the societal structures we inhabit. And to embrace the enduring power of a life lived with intention and a deep connection to fundamental truths. The result of Thoreau's 2-year experiment at Walden Pond was not merely a personal anecdote but a profound philosophical treatise and a potent social critique. Walden, or Life in the Woods, published in 1854, presented a compelling argument for a life lived with intention, stripped of superfluous distractions. Thoreau's articulation of deliberate living became a touchstone for those seeking a more meaningful existence. Advocating for present-moment awareness and the prioritization of essential human experiences over material accumulation. His emphasis on self-reliance, deeply influenced by Emerson, offered a powerful counterpoint to the growing conformity of his era. Urging individuals to trust their inner voice and forge their own paths. Furthermore, his critique of materialism and consumerism, vividly detailed through his accounts of his simple yet rich life at the pond, resonated deeply with a society increasingly captivated by the promise of progress through economic expansion. The book offered a vision of spiritual awakening through direct engagement with nature and a conscious simplification of one's life, suggesting that true wealth lay not in possessions but in the depth and quality of one's lived experience. The narrative of Walden serves as a powerful manual for simple living, offering practical insights and philosophical justifications for a life less encumbered by material possessions and societal demands. Thoreau meticulously detailed how he managed his daily life, from building his shelter to procuring food, demonstrating that a life of substance and satisfaction could be achieved with minimal economic outlay. His accounts are not merely descriptive, they are prescriptive, encouraging readers to examine their own needs and desires, and to question the relentless pursuit of more. The book's enduring appeal lies in its ability to demystify the idea of simple living, presenting it not as a form of deprivation, but as a liberation, a shedding of the unnecessary to make room for what is truly essential. Thoreau's work provides a compelling argument for intentionality in daily choices, advocating for a focus on experiences, relationships, and personal growth over the accumulation of material wealth, thereby offering a blueprint for a more grounded and fulfilling existence. The enduring legacy of Henry David Thoreau's Walden is intrinsically linked to its potent critique of mid-19th century American society and its prescient articulation of principles for intentional living. More than a romantic escape into the wilderness, Walden stands as a profound philosophical manifesto, urging a radical re-evaluation of societal values. Thoreau masterfully exposed the hollowness of rampant materialism and consumerism, advocating for a life deliberately stripped of excess. A life that embraced simplicity as a pathway to genuine fulfillment. His experiment at Walden Pond was a practical demonstration of this philosophy, a testament to the power of self-reliance and a deep connection with the natural world. The book's influence extends far beyond its literary merit, it has become a foundational text for environmental movements, a touchstone for individualists and nonconformists, and a source of inspiration for anyone seeking to live a more conscious and meaningful existence. The deliberate life he championed continues to resonate, offering a timeless challenge to the prevailing currents of modern existence and a powerful affirmation of the human capacity for profound self-discovery. The academic and scholarly reception of Walden reveals a persistent and evolving engagement with its profound philosophical and literary contributions. Scholars have delved into its intricate ecological philosophy, analyzing Thoreau's meticulous observations of the natural world through the lens of eco-criticism. Comparative literature studies have highlighted its connections to broader Romantic traditions and its unique place within American literary history. Linguistic analyses reveal the deliberate craftsmanship of Thoreau's prose, the precise word choices that imbue his descriptions with both lyrical beauty and intellectual rigor. The book is frequently examined not just as a memoir or a nature essay, but as a complex philosophical treatise that challenges conventional notions of what constitutes a meaningful life. This ongoing scholarly dissection, spanning diverse critical approaches, underscores the enduring relevance of Walden, confirming its status as a foundational text for understanding not only American transcendentalism but also enduring questions about human existence, societal progress, and our relationship with the environment. While Walden is celebrated for its articulation of deliberate living and its critique of industrial society, it is also important to acknowledge the perspectives that have emerged regarding potential limitations and criticisms of Thoreau's philosophy and his experiment. The radical simplicity advocated by Thoreau, while inspiring, presents practical challenges for widespread adoption. His ability to retreat to Walden Pond, largely free from the complex familial and economic obligations that burden most individuals, raises questions about the universal applicability of his lifestyle. Critics have pointed out that his self-sufficiency, while admirable, was achieved under relatively privileged circumstances. And the model may not be easily replicable for those with greater societal constraints. Furthermore, the inherent idealism in some of his pronouncements, while serving as a powerful call to re-evaluation, can be seen as overlooking the systemic issues that contribute to the lives of quiet desperation he so keenly observed. These critiques do not diminish the profound impact of Walden, but rather add layers of complexity to its interpretation, suggesting that its value lies not necessarily in literal replication, but in its enduring call for conscious introspection and a critical examination of one's own relationship with society and the natural world. The intellectual lineage of Walden is undeniably intertwined with the broader currents of American Transcendentalism. Yet Thoreau carved out a unique and enduring place within this philosophical landscape. While drawing inspiration from figures like Emerson, his commitment to empirical observation and his direct, almost confrontational, engagement with the practicalities of living set him apart. His focus on nature, individualism, and self-reliance resonated deeply with transcendentalist ideals. But his emphasis on rigorous personal experimentation and his sharp critique of societal structures gave his work a distinct edge. Beyond transcendentalism, his insights anticipated later philosophical movements such as pragmatism and phenomenology. And his deep ecological awareness laid groundwork for modern environmental philosophy. Walden's enduring appeal lies in its ability to speak across disciplines and generations, a testament to its profound philosophical depth and its practical relevance. The book continues to be a touchstone for freethinkers, environmental advocates, libertarians, and even modern life coaches, attesting to the multifaceted and persistent influence of Thoreau's radical vision. The actual experiment at Walden Pond, while concise in its duration, was rich in its lived experience and philosophical import. Thoreau arrived at Walden in the spring of 1845, constructing a small cabin on land owned by his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, overlooking the tranquil waters of the pond. His initial goal was to live simply, to reduce his expenses to a minimum, thereby freeing himself from the necessity of excessive labor and allowing him the time for contemplation and writing. He famously enumerated the four necessities of life: shelter, food, clothing, and fuel, and sought to meet these with the least possible expenditure of energy and material resources. His days were structured around practical tasks: tending his bean field, chopping wood for warmth, observing the flora and fauna, and, crucially, writing. He meticulously recorded his observations of the pond's changing states, the behavior of its inhabitants, and his own reflections on life. The pond itself became a central character in his narrative, a mirror reflecting the broader truths of existence. Its depth, its clarity, its cyclical transformation served as powerful metaphors for the human psyche and the natural order. While often characterized as a period of isolation, Thoreau did receive visitors, and he did venture into Concord for social interaction and supplies, demonstrating that his withdrawal was not absolute but a strategic recalibration of his engagement with society. The experiment, concluding in the fall of 1847, was not marked by dramatic pronouncements of success or failure in a conventional sense, but rather by the profound realization of his core tenets. He had demonstrated, through his own lived experience, the feasibility of a life of radical simplicity, self-sufficiency, and profound connection to the natural world, proving that material wealth was not a prerequisite for a rich and meaningful existence. The perceived success of the experiment lay not in overcoming external obstacles, but in the internal transformation and the validation of his philosophical convictions. Thoreau's embrace of nature was far from a mere romantic escapade, a superficial retreat from the burgeoning industrial society of 19th-century America. Instead, his sojourn at Walden Pond was a deeply philosophical undertaking, a deliberate experiment in living that served as a powerful rebuttal to the prevailing currents of materialism and conformity. His engagement with the natural world was not an act of passive observation, but an active inquiry into the fundamental truths of existence, a rigorous process of stripping away societal artifice to arrive at essential realities. This was a philosophical laboratory where he tested his theories on self-reliance, simplicity, and the intrinsic value of the wild, directly challenging the societal narrative that progress was synonymous with technological advancement and economic accumulation. He meticulously documented the minutiae of his environment, not merely as a naturalist, but as a philosopher seeking lessons in the intricate, interconnected patterns of life. The stark beauty of a winter landscape, the subtle shift of seasons, the intricate life cycle of a pond creature, these were not just picturesque scenes, but profound texts from which he drew critical insights into the human condition and the nature of reality itself. His meticulous attention to detail, to the empirical facts of his natural surroundings, provided the grounding for his loftier transcendental aspirations, demonstrating that profound wisdom could be unearthed not in grand pronouncements or academic treatises, but in the quiet, observant communion with the earth. This was a conscious act of philosophical defiance, a demonstration that a life lived in accordance with nature's rhythms offered a richer, more authentic existence than the lives of quiet desperation that plagued so many in his time. The intellectual lineage from Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond experiment to his seminal essay, Civil Disobedience, represents a profound evolution of his philosophy, transforming personal introspection into a call for public action. The cause for this transition lay in Thoreau's developing conviction that a life lived deliberately and self-reliantly could not remain entirely detached from the injustices and moral compromises of the society from which he had temporarily withdrawn. Having honed his principles of individual conscience, self-sufficiency, and a direct engagement with fundamental truths at Walden, Thoreau felt compelled to apply these insights to the political and social sphere, arguing that true integrity demanded resistance to unjust laws and governmental overreach, even at personal cost. The historical context for the development of Thoreau's political philosophy was a nation grappling with significant moral and political challenges. The mid-19th century in America was a period marked by the expansion of slavery, the controversial Mexican-American War, and a growing awareness of the tension between individual liberty and state authority. Thoreau's personal experience of being imprisoned for refusing to pay a poll tax that supported slavery and the war directly fueled his thinking. His time at Walden, which had provided him with a sanctuary for developing his independent thought, now served as the intellectual launching pad for his critique of a government that, in his view, acted against the moral conscience of its most thoughtful citizens. The principles he cultivated in solitude, self-reliance, clarity of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to truth provided him with the fortitude to challenge the established political order. The narrative development from Walden to Civil Disobedience is marked by a shift from an inward-looking exploration of personal freedom to an outward-facing advocacy for individual conscience in the face of state power. Walden is about finding freedom by simplifying one's life and connecting with nature, a path to self-mastery and spiritual independence. Civil Disobedience, on the other hand, is about asserting that independence by refusing to cooperate with an unjust government. Thoreau argues in Civil Disobedience that individuals have a moral obligation to disobey laws that they know to be unjust, asserting that under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. This is a direct application of the self-reliance he practiced at Walden, instead of relying on the government to be just. The individual must rely on their own conscience as the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. The principles of nonconformity and individualism, so central to Walden, become the bedrock of his argument for political resistance. He critiques the idea that majority rule is inherently just, famously stating, "Must the citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience?" This question echoes the introspective process that led him to Walden, where he sought to live according to his own inner compass. The result of this intellectual and philosophical lineage is a powerful articulation of individual conscience as the ultimate authority, superseding the dictates of the state when those dictates conflict with fundamental moral principles. The self-reliance and deliberate living Thoreau cultivated at Walden provided him with the inner strength and clarity to confront the injustices of the political system. His experience in nature had taught him about order, integrity, and essential truths, and he recognized that the political realm, too, had a fundamental moral order that governments should uphold. Civil Disobedience emerged as a direct consequence of the philosophical groundwork laid at Walden, demonstrating that a life dedicated to understanding oneself and living authentically inevitably leads to a confrontation with societal and governmental failings. This essay, inspired by his retreat into nature, ultimately champions a form of active, principled resistance that is essential for maintaining a truly just and free society, proving that the lessons learned in solitude can, and indeed must, inform our public lives. The profound influence of Ralph Waldo Emerson on Henry David Thoreau's intellectual development, particularly concerning American Transcendentalism, cannot be overstated. Emerson, a leading voice of the movement, championed the innate divinity within each individual and the inherent spiritual significance of the natural world. His essays, widely circulated and discussed within their intellectual circle, provided Thoreau with the theoretical framework and encouragement to pursue his radical experiment. Emerson's ideas about intuition, self-trust, and the rejection of rigid dogma resonated deeply with Thoreau, fueling his own inclination towards independent thought and a spiritual connection with nature. While Thoreau applied these principles in a more practical, experiential manner at Walden Pond, it was Emerson's philosophical expositions that ignited and sustained his quest for a higher, more conscious existence, solidifying Walden's place as a seminal work within the broader currents of transcendentalist thought and its impact on American intellectual history. Thoreau's critique of materialism and the burgeoning industrial age in America, detailed in Walden, serves as a powerful and enduring indictment of a society increasingly defined by its pursuit of wealth and material possessions. He observed how the rapid industrialization and economic expansion of the 19th century fostered a culture obsessed with acquiring more goods, often at the expense of genuine human connection and spiritual well-being. Thoreau lamented how individuals became tools of their tools, enslaved by the very possessions and industries they created in their pursuit of progress and comfort. His vivid descriptions of the relentless work required to maintain a life of conventional material comfort exposed the often hidden costs of consumerism, revealing it as a form of self-imposed bondage. Thoreau argued that this ceaseless pursuit of material wealth led to a spiritual and emotional emptiness, distracting people from the more profound and lasting satisfactions that could be found in simple living, meaningful relationships, and a deep connection with the natural world. His work stands as a powerful early indictment of a culture increasingly driven by the acquisition of things, urging a fundamental re-evaluation of what constitutes a truly rich and fulfilling life. Thoreau's critique of materialism and the emerging capitalist economic systems, laid out vividly in the Economy chapter of Walden, stemmed from his deep-seated belief that these systems fundamentally corrupted human values and enslaved individuals. He observed a society where the primary measure of success and happiness was material accumulation, a pursuit that, in his view, led individuals away from their true selves and their inherent spiritual potential. The cause of this critique was his perception of a pervasive cultural delusion, that more possessions equate to a better life. He saw how people were driven by societal expectations and the relentless pursuit of wealth, often at the expense of their own well-being, their relationships, and their connection to the natural world. This relentless focus on economic gain, he argued, transformed human beings into mere laborers, their lives dictated by the need to earn money to purchase goods that ultimately offered little genuine satisfaction. The narrative development of Thoreau's economic critique unfolds as a series of sharp observations and logical deconstructions of societal norms. He dissects the concept of need versus want, arguing that society invents artificial needs that enslave individuals. His famous declaration, "The price of anything is the life you exchange for it," powerfully encapsulates this argument, highlighting the true cost of material possessions not in dollars and cents, but in the time, energy, and life force that must be expended to acquire them. He contrasts the labor required for basic necessities, which he found manageable and even fulfilling when done intentionally, with the arduous and often meaningless labor undertaken solely to support a lifestyle of excessive consumption. Thoreau meticulously analyzes the economics of his own life at Walden Pond, demonstrating how minimal expenditure on basic necessities allowed him to dedicate the majority of his time to intellectual pursuits, self-reflection, and communion with nature. He contrasts this with the vast amounts of time and effort that others dedicated to earning money to pay for rent, clothing, and food, a cycle he deemed fundamentally unsustainable and spiritually impoverishing. He challenged the very notion of wealth, suggesting that true riches were found in intangible qualities like time, health, freedom, and intellectual and spiritual depth, rather than in monetary assets or material possessions. The result of Thoreau's economic critique is a radical re-evaluation of wealth and a powerful argument for prioritizing spiritual and experiential wealth over material accumulation. He posits that by consciously reducing one's material dependencies, individuals can liberate themselves from the demands of a consumerist economy. This liberation allows for a life of greater autonomy, where one's time and energy are directed towards self-discovery, creative expression, and a deeper engagement with the world. Thoreau's vision suggests that a society that values inner richness over outward display would be more fulfilling and equitable. His work serves as a timeless challenge to the relentless pursuit of economic growth at the expense of human well-being and environmental health. Advocating for a more sustainable and ethically grounded approach to economic activity. Thoreau's relentless critique of materialism in Walden was a direct confrontation with the prevailing values of his time and continues to hold immense relevance in contemporary society. He observed how the pursuit of material wealth and possessions had become an end in itself for many, overshadowing more significant aspects of human existence such as spiritual growth, intellectual development, and meaningful connection. His writings expose the hollowness of a life defined by the acquisition of goods, arguing that such a focus leads to a loss of self, an enslavement to the external, and a profound disconnect from nature and one's own inner being. Thoreau posited that true wealth lay not in what one owned, but in the richness of one's experiences and the depth of one's understanding. His critique serves as a timeless admonition against the dangers of consumer culture and the superficiality it breeds, urging individuals to re-examine their priorities and to seek fulfillment in sources that are enduring and intrinsically valuable, rather than fleeting material gains. The structure of Walden itself is a testament to Thoreau's deliberate artistry, meticulously organized to reflect the cyclical passage of time and the progression of his experiment. While the narrative spans a period of just over 2 years, from July 1845 to September 1847, the book is artfully condensed into the framework of a single year, from spring to spring, guiding the reader through the changing seasons. This seasonal rhythm, woven through 18 distinct chapters, provides a natural order for his philosophical reflections, his social critiques, and his detailed natural histories. The book is, in a sense, rounded off by the arrival of spring and the concluding reflection, symbolizing rebirth and a re-evaluation of life's journey. This cyclical structure emphasizes the enduring patterns of nature as a counterpoint to the often frantic and linear progression of human life. Nicholas Bagnall's observation of Thoreau's lyrical and exact descriptions of nature is crucial here, as these precise observations are not mere embellishments but integral elements that anchor the philosophical discourse in the tangible reality of the natural world, creating a rich tapestry of sensory experience and intellectual depth. The influence of Ralph Waldo Emerson on Henry David Thoreau's intellectual development, particularly within the context of American Transcendentalism, was foundational and pervasive. Emerson, a close friend and mentor, was instrumental in shaping Thoreau's philosophical vocabulary and providing him with the intellectual scaffolding for his own radical ideas. Emerson's emphasis on intuition, the inherent divinity within each individual, and the spiritual significance of nature provided Thoreau with a framework for his own observations and experiences at Walden Pond. Essays like Nature and Self-Reliance articulated core transcendentalist tenets: the inherent goodness of humanity, the importance of individual conscience, and the idea that true knowledge comes from within and from direct experience of the divine in nature. Thoreau internalized these concepts, translating them into the practical, lived reality of his experiment, thereby solidifying Walden as a quintessential expression of the Transcendentalist movement and its enduring impact on American thought. Thoreau's philosophy at Walden embraced a nuanced view of work and its role in human fulfillment, challenging the prevailing notion of labor as merely a means of subsistence. He posited that engaging in purposeful and self-directed work was not only a pathway to self-reliance but also a source of spiritual growth and a foundation for a morally sound life. For Thoreau, the alienated labor that characterized much of industrial society was antithetical to genuine human development. He sought work that was intrinsically rewarding, that fostered a connection to the earth and to one's own capabilities. His own endeavors at Walden, from building his cabin to cultivating his beans, were undertaken with a deliberate mindfulness, transforming them from chores into acts of conscious living. Brian Walker's interpretation of Walden as an advisory tract for an alternative economics highlights this dimension, suggesting that Thoreau was advocating for an economic system that prioritized human well-being and spiritual richness over profit and endless accumulation. This perspective underscores that his rejection of materialism was not a dismissal of necessary labor, but a call to redefine its purpose and its place in a meaningful existence. The enduring influence of Henry David Thoreau's Walden has extended far beyond the confines of 19th-century Concord, shaping and inspiring a multitude of contemporary movements dedicated to environmental stewardship, mindful living, and social justice. His profound advocacy for the preservation of wild spaces and his lyrical, yet empirically grounded observations of nature laid crucial groundwork for the modern environmental movement. Thinkers and activists in this sphere, from John Muir, who championed the establishment of national parks, to contemporary proponents of conservation and ecological sustainability, have all, implicitly or explicitly, drawn inspiration from Thoreau's deep reverence for the natural world and his articulation of its intrinsic value. Furthermore, his essay, Civil Disobedience, a powerful testament to the moral obligation to resist unjust laws, provided a foundational text for movements championing nonviolent resistance. Mahatma Gandhi, in his struggle for Indian independence, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his fight for civil rights in America, both cited Thoreau's work as a direct influence, adopting his principles of moral conviction and principled opposition to state-sanctioned injustice. On a more personal level, Thoreau's insistent call to simplify, and his demonstration of a life lived deliberately have become cornerstones for the